Hello, good people of the internet. So today I'm going to be sharing some Geoguessr tips that I've learned over the past year, I suppose, of playing this game in a more serious fashion. Still not particularly serious, but serious enough to have a show about it. So my approach to learning and distinguishing between countries on Geoguessr is perhaps a little bit different than the hardcore Geoguessr pros, but that's not a blanket statement. Everybody does it differently. So the way I keep this pursuit as interesting as possible is by making it fun. The differences I'm looking for typically, but not always, pertain to something that I'm interested in. So my advice is that you should do the same as well. What do I mean by that? For example, I won't memorize utility poles to determine whether I'm in Saudi Arabia or Senegal. I'm more inclined to look at the architecture, or the people, or the clothing, or the text. You might be interested in utility poles. When I'm learning about a country's features, I'm not simply memorizing that feature, I'm learning something about it. For example, if I notice that there are more satellite dishes on houses, or if there are low vaulted ceilings in one area, or if there are concrete roads in one area or in one country, rather than just remembering that country has that feature, I'd like to learn why it has that feature. And that way, the feature has a memory or a story attached to it, and it's easier for me to remember. That's just how I do it. Anyway, so when you go on your journey of learning country features, I think before you get into the nitty-gritty of it, there are three? I just picked that number out of thin air. Well, there are a couple or a few things that are probably the most important. Number one. So tip number one is driving side. There are approximately 25 countries in the world that drive on the left-hand side of the road. So if you know which side you're driving on and which countries drive on the left-hand side of the road, you've already significantly narrowed down which countries you could be in. There are nearly 200 countries in the world. There's 198 countries in the world. So that is probably the best thing and the most valuable thing you could find out. The second most valuable tip that's pretty easy to learn is sun direction. So this tip will help you determine whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. And there are a number of ways you can do this. So the first way, you need to face the sun and then check your compass direction. As you can see, we're pointing north. And if you find yourself facing north and looking at the sun, that is a clear indicator that you are in the southern hemisphere. Now, this doesn't work on all occasions. You might arrive in a location and find that it's overcast. Sometimes you can sort of figure out by the overexposed area in the sky, but sometimes it's also impossible. Another instance when the sun might help, I had a look around for an example, but it was too hard to find. Sometimes you'll land in a place and the sun will appear to be directly above head. And if you point the compass north, you might think it's in the north, but then if you point the compass south, you'll find the sun is there as well. And that typically means it's noon or around midday. The sun's directly above you. It's not useful for guessing which hemisphere you're in, and you'll have to rely on some other clues. All right, I think I'll leave that one at 2 tips. So the first thrilling tip I have is to do with determining whether you are in East Canada or West Canada. And there's one simple way that I figure this out, and it's to do with houses. So typically in Eastern Canada, the houses will have, I don't know what the appropriate word is, maybe a more formal appearance. I don't know. But you will find that more often than not, houses in Eastern Canada are made of brick or of stone, as you can see here. These are brick houses. Here's another example. This is in Quebec. The first example was in Ontario, and this is Quebec City. Here's another image from Quebec City of stone houses, brick houses. And now we'll compare it with Western Canada. So this first image is from Calgary in Alberta. You have the kind of weatherboard or wood frame houses. This one's in Edmonton. And this is Mission Beach in British Columbia, more wooden houses. They do have some stone features, but typically wooden. Now we're going to travel a bit further north. So houses that are, I guess, maybe northwestern in particular are also wooden, And they don't have vaulted ceilings like the one we just saw in Edmonton. So Canadians are very economical, I guess, unlike their US counterparts, in that they will have these, I guess, low vaulted ceilings to conserve heat. Canada's cold. It makes sense. This is how they keep their houses really warm. So this is Fort Nelson in British Columbia, even further north, as you can see, low ceilings. Another feature I've noticed, Canadian houses don't tend to have elaborate front porches compared to, say, the US or even Australia. Australia, they love verandas and porches. But they do have back porches and back decks. So as you can see here, this is actually a good example. This is the front of this house here, and this is their backyard. They've got their little deck out the back. So they prefer to put their deck in the backyard. And now this is an example from the US. So this is just to compare a US house to a Canadian house. This is very far north, so it would get as cold here in New Hampshire as it does in, say, Quebec City or in Vancouver or in, I suppose, Calgary. Maybe Calgary's colder. But anyway, just to compare. So Americans have high vaulted ceilings. They'll often have 1, 2, or 3 stories. This one appears to have 3, but this might be their attic. I don't think Canadians have attics. I think their preference is basements, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you're Canadian or American. So yeah, less, I suppose, consideration for heating the space. I imagine this would be difficult to heat. I don't know. And yeah, as you can see, we have little front porches here as well. So that's one simple way I use to figure out if I'm in the US or Canada. So why are Eastern Canada's houses made from brick and Western Canada's houses made from stucco or wood? There's a couple of reasons. Eastern Canada is a region that has a lot of clay mineral deposits. So clay is obviously used to manufacture bricks. It was the most practical and suitable building material for this region. On the western side, there was less clay available, and transporting bricks isn't the easiest, so they had more timber available, and therefore more timber houses were made. It's also cheaper to build timber houses as well, so there might be an economical factor in there too, but I don't know. The next reason is kind of fascinating, and this reason is also true perhaps, but again, there's exceptions. Obviously there's exceptions, because people can build whatever the hell kind of houses they want. Take Australia, for example. So typically you'll find that on the west coast of Canada, extending all the way down to California, that most houses are made from timber or stucco. Stucco is what Americans call like render. So a lot of houses will look like they have a kind of stone finish, but in fact it's just a render or stucco that's been applied to drywall. And on the east coast of America and east coast of Canada, as we've mentioned, you're more likely to find brick houses. But why? It's because of the San Andreas fault line. So this is a tectonic boundary, a boundary between the Pacific plate and the North American plate, continental plates. So of course, this is an area that experiences a lot of earthquakes. So there's housing materials that are more optimal in an earthquake situation. Brick isn't one of them. It's dangerous. Brick and stone and shale are brittle, and typically something more flexible like steel is preferred. Also, large pieces of building material are also preferred, like a big piece of drywall with stucco applied or a light wooden frame. And that's one of the other reasons why. All right, that's enough about the US and Canada. Let's move on to my next tip. Now, travel with me to Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan's a country with limited coverage, but still a lot of coverage. And if you want to get really good at guessing here, there are a few things that you can look for. Firstly, if you want to know if you're in Kyrgyzstan at all, if you're lucky enough to be in an urban area and you can see a car in front of you, if you see the orange on the number plate, that is the best indicator that you're in Kyrgyzstan. If you find yourself in a location like this, there's a pretty good chance that you're in Kyrgyzstan as well, because Kyrgyzstan is blessed with some pretty amazing mountain scenery. as you can see here. If you're in an urban area and you see mountains like this and you kind of have a feeling you're in one of the stands, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and Tajikistan, for whatever reason you think you're in one of them, if you see mountains like this, 9 times out of 10, you are going to be in Kyrgyzstan. They have an incredible mountain range. So there are 2 cities with coverage. There's Bishkek, the capital, which is here, and there's this place down here called Osh. So how do you know whether you're in Osh or Bishkek? Now, there's one kind of funny way. Now, I'm not a huge fan of in-game meta, so things to do with the Google car or image quality of the photo, but I don't mind learning the really simple ones. You know, like making out the blur on the number plate or the blur on a Google car or the length of an antenna, it does my head in. But this one I can handle. So let me show you. Okay, so here we are in Osh. How do I know it's Osh? Basically, I navigate to the front of the car and I look at these mirrors here. So if you zoom in on the left-hand mirror, I'll just show you. Let's take a look. This is a pretty dirty side mirror, and you can see that it's kind of pointing at the road line or a little bit of the car. Here is another example. You can see a lot of the road in this mirror, side mirror, and the mirror looks dirty as well on top of it. Now let me take you to Bishkek, the capital. So if you look at the mirror in Bishkek, and it's got to be the left mirror too. In Bishkek, you can see the tire of the car and the mirror is a little cleaner. Here's another from Bishkek. You can see the wheel hub again. All right, so now let's compare them. Osh, dirt splatter, no visible tire. Bishkek, clean side mirror, tire visible. That is the best way to determine whether you're in Osh or Bishkek. Well, that's the way I do it. I mean, you could study these cities, you could study the buildings, you could study the signs, you could learn Cyrillic or a Slavic language. They would be the ultimate ways to tell the difference. But short of that, that's what I do. All right. Now I bring you to Australia. I can't speak for all Australians that play this game, but for this Australian, region guessing in Australia can be hard, especially if you're on rural roads. One interesting tip, I didn't discover this tip. I learned this tip from Zigzag. Shout out to the South Australian himself. So this one is to determine that you're in South Australia. And it's a pretty cool clue. You need to direct yourself to the edge line of a South Australian road. This doesn't occur on all of South Australian roads, but it occurs on a lot. And as you can see here on this edge line, there's a short break in the edge line, and then there's a red reflector. Interestingly, these red reflectors occur on left-hand sides of roads. So that means you're in South Australia. This is unique to South Australia. There are no other states in Australia that have this broken feature. So today I got up the courage and phoned a business in South Australia called Action Line Marketing. And I asked them about this line break. I asked them why it occurred. The first person I spoke to, they had that kind of like, what the fuck are you calling me for? They weren't rude. They directed me to the DIT. They said, you should ask them. And I said, thank you very much. That's exactly what I'll do. Then she said, actually, hold on a second. And I was put on hold. I was then connected with another lovely staff member at Action Line Marking, a lovely woman named Doris. And Doris knew exactly what I was talking about. Doris has worked at the company for maybe 15 or more years. I can't remember Doris. Very sorry. And she said that this is unique to South Australia. In South Australia, they get a set of guides and they have to implement them when they're making the road markings. She did, however, say that this has been discontinued and that now the standard is a completely unbroken line in South Australia. And this ended in around 2015 or 16. So if you do see this in South Australia, you'll know it's on a road that's at least 5 or 6 years old or older. And if you are on a road without them, you'll know that it's a much newer South Australian road. Doris told me another cool thing about South Australian roads, which I think will prove useful. Again, unique to South Australia. She told me that in some places in South Australia, the edge lines can also be 150 mil or even 200 mil, while the inner line remains at 100 mil. If you are into the nitty-gritty region guessing in Australia, these are some things that might help you. Doris said that she's still learning new things about road lines and road markings and longitudinal versus traverse road markings every single day, and she'd been working there for such a long time. So yeah, I really appreciate you, Doris, and everything you told me on the phone. Thank you very much. And thanks also to your colleagues at Action Line Marking. I really appreciate it. Another great way to determine whether you're in South Australia, and this isn't news to anyone either, is a very classic South Australian feature called the STOBY poll. This is the STOBY poll here. You could bet your money that you're going to be in SA if you see one of these bad boys. So this STOBY poll was invented by a South Australian out of necessity, basically. There was a shortage of termite-free timber in the region. It's flat steel joists held together with concrete. So this is a pretty unique utility pole or telephone pole designed for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's rot-proof, it's fireproof, and it's termite-proof. So obviously all of those things are a massive bonus in Australia. You can find these poles in every single state in Australia. They're far less common. For example, slide. Here we are in West Moona in Tasmania, which is a suburb of Hobart. Here is a STOBY pole. Seen better days, but it's still a STOBY pole. Slide. Here we are. This is Broken Hill in New South Wales. Here's the STOBY pole. Very majestic looking STOBY pole, this one, I might say. There's also examples of STOBY poles in the Darwin CBD. There's a lot in the Goldfields, Esperance area of Western Australia. There's even some in Canberra. There's a few thousand of them in Tasmania. The only downside to STOBY poles is that in a collision, it's not great on the STOBY pole. In some cases, a car is being completely severed in half, whereas if you were hitting a round wooden pole, the car sometimes deflects off one side or the other, and it is less likely to tear through the car in the way that the edges and the hardness of a STOBY pole would. So that is the one downside to the STOBY pole. All right, I should have said that fact first. Anyway, carrying on, I think that's it for SA. It started with a break in the road line, then it went on a bit, but that's okay. That's what makes this game fun. It's not just the space in between two white lines, it's the story behind it. Sorry, one more thing about STOBY poles. When I was doing a little bit of research, this came up. So this is a bike track in Bolivar in South Australia. Apologies if I've butchered your town name. It is what it is. So basically, the cyclist was riding along this bike track one day that he'd presumably been riding along for a number of years since he's a resident, and he came across this STOBY pole that was just smack bang in the middle of the bike path. And of course he was confused and alarmed because that's ridiculous. Anyway, he contacted the council and they said, we had to put the STOBY pole there. We couldn't put it on the left of the path because of the wetlands. You can see the wetlands here. And we couldn't put it on the right-hand side of the path because of some protected vegetation. So they had to put it in the middle of the bike path. I mean, did it really need to be there? That is the question. Surely this is a massive hazard. If you're whipping around this corner on your bike, like, come on. Use some common fucking sense. Anyway, all right. So I don't know how this was resolved. Apparently there's another one on the bike track too. So RIP anyone that's cycling in Bolivar. Keep an eye out for this metal, steel and concrete. Okay, I'm really done with SA now. Okay, on to the last tip from me today. This is to do with, actually, it's the second last tip. I'm sorry, it's the second last tip. All right, so this is to do with language. I'd like to reiterate that I look for the things that interest me in this game, and language is something that interests me. So let's talk about language. So despite the obvious fact that there's a massive Ukrainian flag right in front of our face, what is another way to determine that we are in Ukraine in this image? I'll give you a second to think about it. Yes, it's the text. Well done. Russia and Ukraine use an Eastern Slavic language. A lot of their letters are similar, but there are some that are different. This sign here has an example of a letter or a character that is unique to Ukraine that you will never find in Russia, and that is the I here. So this I with the double dot. Okay, now on to Russia. All right, here we are in Russia. This is a sign on the wall. Captain Obvious. So the letter I've chosen, it is the capital letter E here in this sign with the umlaut, I guess, on top. That is unique to Russia. Yeah, that is that done and dusted. That's a short one for you. Just determining between those two things. It's really only helpful in a city or an urban setting, obviously, because if you can't see the letters and you're in one of those countries, you are stuffed. No, you're not really. There are things you can look for, but I'll talk about them in another episode. Okay, enough of that. All right, on to the third and final hint from me, and it's internet domains. So internet domains are super handy to just quickly figure out where you are. If you're lucky enough to spot one on a sign, most of them are easy to identify. You can look at the letters and you're like, yep, AU, Australia, bang, got it. JA, Japan, woohoo, done. Let's go, Tokyo. Now, there are some exceptions, and it's worthwhile learning them because it could mean the difference between, me picking the correct country and pedal posting picking the incorrect country. So it's definitely worthwhile. I've selected 3 examples of non-obvious domain names. The first one is this one, HR. So don't be mistaken in thinking this is Hungary. Hopefully you won't just by looking at the location, but I mean, this isn't, and the flag, but this could be confused with Hungary. I could see that happening. This country domain means Hrvatska. So Hrvatska, I apologize deeply to every single Croatian for this pronunciation. So yeah, this Hrvatska is how a Croatian would say their country name. So that is the HR, Hrvatska. I don't know why I said it again. Anyway, so that's a good one to look for if you happen to be here and you see that. Do not pick Hungary. I've done it before, but never again. The second one. Now, this is one I know a lot of people know about, but that's okay. I'm going to talk to you about it anyway. Here we go. We got CH. Czechia, you say? China, perhaps? No, it's Switzerland. It's Switzerland. CH. How did we get there? Switzerland. Well, it's quite a tale, and you know I love a story, so let me tell you all about it. So the Latin name for Switzerland is Confederatio or Confederatio. So the Latin name for Switzerland is Confederatio. Shit. So the Latin name for Switzerland is Confederatio Helvetica. That's the best I can do. I'm so sorry. Anyway, so I'm not going to repeat the Latin name. That's the Latin name. The Latin name was designed to represent Switzerland's neutrality. Because of Switzerland's linguistic diversity, it means that Switzerland has a lot of native or regional names. So Helvetica, as it's just sometimes known as, I don't know why I didn't just say that from the beginning, national word for Switzerland. So that is why it appears on the Swiss country code, and it also appears on Swiss currency as well, CH. So there's a very common font, more common than you might realize, that was invented by 2 Swiss people, and the font that they invented is called Helvetica, which they named after their homeland, Switzerland. So if the world was writing an essay, Helvetica would be its absolute font of choice. You can see it on signs everywhere. Here's another example. Helvetica is a sans serif font, which is a very accessible font. It's easy to read. It's no frills. The letters are nicely spaced apart and they're tall. Commercially, Helvetica is also the most popular font for a number of global brands such as Target, Kawasaki, and BMW, to name a few. All right, that's the end of the origin story of the CH on the Swiss domain. I hope you found that interesting. All right, finally, we're onto this domain here, .kh. Now, if you're like me and you find it difficult to distinguish between some Southeast Asian texts, for example, the text in Laos versus the text in Thailand versus the text in Cambodia versus the text in, I don't know, Bangladesh even, or India, somewhere like that, then yeah, country codes, it's always a good default. Never be ashamed to rely on a country code. They're worth learning. So this one is unique. .kh is the country code for Cambodia. So Khmer means Cambodian. It's synonymous with Cambodian, as in the language that Cambodian people speak is Khmer. You might know the word Khmer from the very infamous Communist Party, the Khmer Rouge, which was led by one of the most evil men in history, and that's Pol Pot. Pol Pot, oh man, Pol Pot. He basically wiped out 25% of the Cambodian population. He murdered the ethnic Thai, Chinese, and Vietnamese populations in Cambodia. He also murdered Cambodian Christians, Cham Muslims, and other minority groups as well. So I digress again, but that is the sad history. All right, I don't think I can end the show on genocide. Okay, the last tip I'll leave you with is for region guessing in the US. So the US is obviously a very hard place to guess. Sometimes if you drop in and you know you're in the US, you might just resort to dropping the pin anywhere without even bothering to have a look around at things other than the landscape. But if you just take a little bit more time and you can say spot a sign, it's very worthwhile to look at it, because oftentimes US state highway signs, they're all unique to the state. Some are more unique than others. Some have the state written on it, which is especially useful. Others will have the outline of the state. This is the state outline of South Dakota. So you just compare that to what's in the map. Bob's your uncle. Here's another one. This is Missouri. And yeah, great way to pick a state if you see that sign. Here's a really unique one from Magdalena in New Mexico. I like this one a lot. The one from Kansas is really cool too. I searched around and I couldn't find one, so I'm just going to show you a Google image. Here it is. Don't forget to look out for them. That's a good tip. And maybe memorize some of the fun ones if you like the look of them. Like, are you ever going to forget that this is the Kansas State Highway sign? Probably not. It looks like a Teletubbies Ninja Death Star or something. Or a sun, whatever. So, that concludes hints. I hope that wasn't too boring. Maybe slightly informative. A little bit different even. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get the max enjoyment out of this game. If you want to learn it, you need to look for the things that are interesting to you rather than memorizing 100 utility poles or 100 bollards or, I don't know, fucking 40 different chevron colors. Those things are fine and you'll just get used to seeing them. Find the things that you love in the image and learn something about them as well, because that way you'll remember them. Not trying to be bossy, but that's how I get the most enjoyment out of the game. So, that's it. Have fun. Oh, and if you like what you're seeing on my geography show, tell your mum about it. Yanama has been following the channel since its inception. Thank you, Mum. And Erica's iPad's mum follows me now as well. Shout out to Erica's awesome mum. That's it. Tell your mum. See you later.